I'm a 29-year-old guy engaged to my fiancée, wonderful woman I've been with for 6 years. She's 30, and we spent the last year planning our wedding. It's the kind of thing you dream about, finding the person you want to spend your life with and celebrating that love with everyone you care about. Both of our families are close-knit, so we were looking forward to a big celebration that would bring everyone together. At least, that was the plan. The engagement itself was perfect. I proposed during a vacation we took earlier this year at this quiet, scenic spot by the ocean. She said yes, and we were over the moon. Her family was ecstatic when they found out, showering us with congratulations and love. My parents were thrilled too. My mom immediately started brainstorming ideas for an engagement dinner, and my dad was already asking when we'd set a date. I thought my sister, who's 27, would be just as happy for us. I was wrong. A little backstory about my sister: she's always been the star of the family. She went to a prestigious college, landed a high-paying job, and generally got praised for everything she did. Meanwhile, I was just the steady, reliable one. It's not like I resent her for it. That's just the way it's always been. She's also the type of person who needs to be at the center of attention, so I had this tiny voice in the back of my head wondering if she'd be okay with me having my moment. Still, I wanted to believe this dinner would go smoothly. My parents invited our extended family to their house for the occasion, and my fiancé and I were excited to share our news. It felt like the perfect opportunity to announce our engagement and kick off the celebrations. When we arrived at my parents' place, everything seemed normal. My mom was busy setting the table, my dad was grilling in the backyard, and family members were trickling in. My sister showed up with her husband about 20 minutes after us, carrying a tray of dessert. She was all smiles, greeting everyone warmly. There was nothing unusual at first, just your typical family gathering with lots of laughter and small talk. About an hour in, everyone sat down for dinner. My mom gave a little toast, welcoming everyone and saying how happy she was to have the family together. I was waiting for the right moment to stand up and announce the engagement, and my fiancé gave me a little nudge to let me know she was ready too. But before I could say a word, my sister suddenly cleared her throat and said she had some exciting news to share. Everyone turned to her, and she smiled and announced she was pregnant. The room went quiet for a few seconds, and then the cheers started. My parents jumped up to hug her, my mom teared up, and everyone at the table started congratulating her and asking questions. It was like someone flipped a switch, and all the attention shifted to her. My fiancé and I sat there, caught completely off guard. I tried to stay composed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she had timed her announcement on purpose. It was obvious she knew what the dinner was for. My parents had told everyone we were planning to share big news. And yet, here she was, dropping her bombshell right before I had a chance to say anything. The rest of the night was a blur. My sister started showing off ultrasound pictures she'd conveniently brought along and talking about her due date. People were asking her about baby names, nursery plans, and how she was feeling. My mom kept calling her the first one to give us a grandbaby like it was the greatest achievement in the world. Meanwhile, my fiancé and I sat there, trying to smile and act like we weren't being completely overshadowed. At one point, my dad tried to bring the conversation back to us, asking if we had anything to share. But by then, it felt pointless. The moment was gone, and I didn't want to force an announcement when no one seemed particularly interested. My fiancé gave me a supportive squeeze under the table, but I could tell she was just as frustrated as I was. After dinner, my sister kept holding court in the living room, soaking up all the attention. My parents couldn't stop gushing over her, and the rest of the family followed suit. My fiancé and I ended up leaving early. On the way home, we talked about what had happened. She said she was happy for my sister but couldn't believe how the focus had shifted so completely. She felt like the timing of the announcement wasn't a coincidence, and honestly, I couldn't disagree. Over the next few days, I tried to process everything. Part of me wanted to believe my sister didn't mean to overshadow us, but the other part couldn't ignore how convenient it all seemed. I talked to a few close friends about it, and they were all on my side, saying it was unfair and out of line. My fiancé encouraged me to confront my sister, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up without making things worse. That's when I decided to share my story here. I'm torn between feeling justified in my frustration and wondering if I'm overreacting. Was it just bad timing, or did my sister deliberately steal the spotlight? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Update 1. After the dinner, I pulled back from my family for a few days. I didn't ignore them completely, but I avoided long conversations and didn't initiate any calls. The whole situation left me uncomfortable, and every time I replayed the night in my head, I felt worse. My fiancé kept encouraging me to address it, but I wasn't sure where to start without causing more drama. 3 days after the dinner, my sister texted me. She suggested we meet up and talk, and while I hesitated, I agreed. She proposed meeting at our parents' house, which felt like neutral ground, so I went along with it. When we sat down to talk, she acted casual, like nothing unusual had happened. I started by bringing up the dinner and how her announcement had completely overshadowed my engagement. She tilted her head, looking surprised, and insisted she hadn't done it on purpose. She claimed she'd only announced the pregnancy because she was excited and couldn't wait any longer to tell everyone. I reminded her that the dinner was specifically meant to share my engagement news. She shrugged it off, saying that family news was family news and it wasn't like one event was more important than the other. My fiancé, who had joined me for the talk, chimed in, trying to explain how hurt she felt by how the night had played out. My sister brushed it off, saying that pregnancies are naturally exciting, and she didn't understand why we were making a big deal about it. The conversation spiraled from there. I pointed out that she could have chosen another time to announce her news instead of hijacking a moment that was meant to celebrate my engagement. She kept repeating that it wasn't intentional and suggested I was overthinking it. She even laughed at one point, calling me too sensitive. Then my parents stepped in. They'd been hovering in the background, and it wasn't long before they jumped into the conversation. They said both the engagement and the pregnancy were big milestones and that we should all be happy for one another. To them, the night was a celebration of family, not about who got the most attention. It felt like they were completely ignoring how deliberate my sister's timing had been. I tried to explain my perspective again, but it was clear they weren't interested in taking sides. My mom said we should focus on the positives and not let small things create tension. My dad nodded in agreement, and it felt like the whole thing was being swept under the rug. After leaving the house, I called a couple of my friends to vent. They were shocked when I told them what had happened and couldn't believe my sister hadn't even apologized. One of them said it sounded like she had a habit of pulling focus, and they didn't understand why my parents were enabling it. The more I thought about it, the more patterns started to emerge. My sister had always been the one to dominate conversations at family gatherings, constantly sharing updates about her job, her house, or her travels. It was like she couldn't stand not being the center of attention, and my parents never seemed to notice. They praised her for everything, while my milestones often felt like afterthoughts. I started questioning whether this jealousy had been building for years. Maybe I just never noticed because I wasn't competing with her. But now that I had something big to celebrate, it felt like she couldn't handle it. A few days later, I decided to confront her again. This time, I was more direct. I told her that her timing was unfair and that her actions came across as selfish. She responded with the same defensiveness, saying I was blowing things out of proportion and accusing me of not being happy for her. She even threw in a comment about how I'd always had things go my way, as if my engagement was just another example of me getting special treatment. I walked away from that conversation even more frustrated. It seemed like no matter what I said, she was going to twist it around and make herself the victim. My fiancé, meanwhile, was starting to feel alienated. She told me she didn't understand why my family couldn't fully support our engagement without turning it into a competition. The tension started bleeding into my relationship. We were supposed to be planning the happiest time of our lives, but instead we were dealing with family drama. My fiancé felt like my parents didn't care about her role in the family, and it was hard to argue when they kept prioritizing my sister's news over ours. I realized something had to change. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was being expected to take a back seat in my own life to accommodate my sister's need for attention. I called my best friend to ask for advice, and she suggested setting boundaries. She said if my sister or parents couldn't respect my feelings, it might be time to pull back for a while. By the end of the week, I made a decision. I needed to address this directly with my parents and figure out if they were willing to support me, or if they were too wrapped up in my sister's drama. If they couldn't acknowledge the problem, I'd have to set some clear boundaries for my own sanity. I wasn't sure how the next conversation would go, but I knew I couldn't keep letting things slide. Update 2. The tension after my second confrontation with my sister didn't fade. A week later, I sat down with my parents to talk things through. We met at their house, and I started by explaining how my sister's timing at the dinner had overshadowed my engagement and how sidelined I felt. My dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, while my mom sat with her hands folded on the table, nodding slightly as I spoke. When I finished, my dad said that I should focus on being happy for my sister. My mom chimed in, saying my sister was going through a big life change and needed support. It felt like they weren't even considering my side. They kept steering the conversation back to her pregnancy, saying things like a baby changes everything, and this is her first time being in the spotlight as a mom. I tried to keep the conversation on track, telling them I was happy for her, but that it wasn't fair for my engagement to be pushed aside. My mom gave a small smile and said the family could celebrate both milestones, but it was clear they'd already decided which one mattered more. Later that day, I bumped into my sister outside. She must have overheard part of the conversation because she started talking about how everyone has their time and this was hers. She mentioned I was already married in all but name, whereas she was just starting her family, like that somehow justified everything. Before I could say much, she walked off, leaving me standing there. That talk with my parents left me questioning a lot. It wasn't just about the dinner anymore. It was about years of feeling like my accomplishments were less important. My fiancée wasn't surprised when I told her how it went, but she was clearly hurt. She said it felt like my family would always prioritize my sister over us. That led to a tense conversation between us about how involved my family should be in the wedding at all. Meanwhile, my sister wasn't backing down. A couple of days after our talk, she started posting pregnancy updates on social media. She shared an ultrasound picture with a caption like, "Our little miracle," and another post about how she was so grateful to be the first grandchild's mom. It wasn't subtle, and it felt like every post was aimed at making her pregnancy the center of attention. I told a few friends about what was happening. One of them said my sister's behavior sounded toxic and that she always seemed to need the spotlight. They couldn't believe my parents didn't see it. Another friend suggested I limit contact with her for my own peace of mind, which sounded more and more appealing. Around this time, my fiancée suggested we step back from family gatherings for a while. She said it wasn't worth the frustration, especially when we were supposed to be planning our wedding. I agreed, and we started skipping casual family dinners and meetups. My sister seemed to notice. She stopped replying to my messages and didn't pick up when I called. When she did speak to me, it was always brief, and she managed to slip in a passive-aggressive comment about how little I'd been around. Once, she joked that maybe I was jealous of her pregnancy, which caught me so off guard I didn't even know how to respond. The next family gathering we attended was awkward from the start. My mom kept glancing at me and my fiancé, but no one brought up the engagement or the wedding plans. My sister, of course, had plenty to share about her pregnancy, everything from nursery themes to her latest doctor's appointment. By the time we left, I was more convinced than ever that my family didn't really care about our big day. I started thinking about boundaries. Up until now, I'd been trying to smooth things over and keep the peace, but it was starting to feel like I was the only one making an effort. Maybe it was time to stop bending over backward to accommodate everyone else. One night, I sat down with my fiancé and talked through what setting boundaries would look like. We agreed that we'd stop updating my family on wedding plans until they showed genuine interest. We'd also scale back on visits to avoid more unnecessary drama. I considered having another heart-to-heart with my sister, but I couldn't decide if it was worth it. Every time we talked, it felt like I was hitting a wall. She'd deflect, play the victim, or twist things around to make it seem like I was the one causing problems. To clear my head, I turned to Reddit. I shared an update, explaining everything that had happened since the dinner and asking for advice. The responses came flooding in. A lot of people said my sister's behavior sounded calculated and that my parents were enabling her. Others suggested going low contact until they started respecting my boundaries. Reading those comments helped me feel less alone, but it also made me realize how deep the rift had become. It wasn't just about the engagement anymore, it was about years of feeling overlooked and underappreciated. I didn't know how to fix it, but I knew one thing: something had to change. Update 3. A week after the last awkward family gathering, my parents invited me over for a family meeting. The text came through with a tone that implied it was urgent. I hesitated, but ultimately decided to go, hoping this could be the resolution we needed. My fiancé wasn't thrilled about it, but supported me going alone, saying it might be easier to navigate without additional tension. When I arrived, my sister was already there, seated comfortably on the couch with my parents flanking her. The moment I walked in, she launched into a defensive monologue. She started rattling off about how I'd been distant, how I couldn't seem to be happy for her, and how I was making everything about me. Her words came rapid fire, leaving no room for a response. My parents didn't intervene, just sitting there as though they were spectators rather than the supposed mediators of this meeting. As she continued, she accused me of being jealous of her pregnancy and refusing to support her during such an important time in her life. She threw in a few comments about how I'd always had things go my way, how I was the first to get married, the first to have a career settled, and now I couldn't even let her have her moment. The whole thing felt rehearsed, like she'd been building up to this tirade for days. I finally snapped. I stood up, cutting through her rant, and told them all that I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I told my parents they had continuously dismissed my feelings, and I was done being treated as a secondary priority. I said I was going to take a step back from the family entirely until they could respect me, my fiancé, and the boundaries I needed to set. The room went quiet for a moment, but my sister immediately dismissed what I said, calling me overly sensitive and selfish. She doubled down, claiming I was the one who had everything handed to me, and that I was just upset because I wasn't the center of attention anymore. My parents didn't step in to defend me or even try to mediate. My dad's only contribution was a vague comment about how families go through ups and downs, while my mom looked like she was holding back tears but still didn't say anything of substance. When I left, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. My fiancé was waiting for me at home, and when I told her how the meeting went, she was upset, not with me, but with the way my family had handled things. She suggested we focus on our lives and stop letting my sister's drama dominate every conversation. She reminded me that our wedding should be about us and our future, not about navigating my family's issues. I decided to try one last thing before stepping back completely: therapy. At my fiance's suggestion, I reached out to a family therapist to see if there was a way to address the deeper issues with my sister and parents. When I brought up the idea to my parents, they dismissed it immediately. My dad said families just argue sometimes, and that therapy wasn't necessary, while my mom claimed it would make things more complicated. My sister didn't even entertain the idea, brushing it off as another example of me being dramatic. Around the same time, my sister posted a new picture of her ultrasound on social media. The caption read, "Our little blessing, the first grandbaby." Exciting times. It felt like another direct jab, especially the emphasis on first grandbaby. I wasn't trying to compete, but it was hard not to feel like this was her way of keeping the spotlight on herself. Frustrated, I made a post of my own. I shared a picture of my fiance's hand with her engagement ring and captioned it, "Exciting news from our side too." It was a simple happy post meant to remind people that we also had something to celebrate. The backlash was immediate. My mom called me the next morning, accusing me of stirring things up and creating drama on purpose. My dad chimed in during the call, saying I should stop trying to one-up my sister and focus on keeping the peace. Meanwhile, my fiancée was reaching her breaking point. She told me she was done with my family's antics, and that she couldn't keep seeing me get hurt over and over again. She said it felt like no matter what I did, they would always choose my sister over me. Hearing her say it out loud made the divide in my family feel even more permanent. At this point, I realized something had to give. My family wasn't going to change, and the emotional toll it was taking on me, and by extension my fiancé, was too much. I decided to officially take a step back from my family. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but I knew I needed to protect my mental health and my relationship. I posted an update on Reddit, asking for advice on how to cope with cutting ties with toxic family members. The responses were a mix of support and tough love, with many people sharing their own stories of stepping back from similar situations. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone, even if the situation still felt overwhelming. For now, I'm focusing on our wedding and building a future with my fiancé. I don't know if my family will ever come around, but I'm learning to be okay with that. Update 4. After deciding to step back from my family, my fiance and I focused on ourselves. We booked a short vacation, a quiet getaway to a cabin in the mountains. It wasn't extravagant, but it gave us the space to clear our heads and be away from all the drama. No family calls, no social media updates to dodge, just us. During our time away, I started individual therapy. It was a new experience for me, but it was eye-opening. The therapist helped me unpack the years of dynamics within my family and pointed out how I'd been enabling my sister without even realizing it. Growing up, my sister was always treated as the golden child. If she got extra praise or attention, the rest of us were expected to let it slide. It became clear that her constant need for validation had shaped the way we all interacted, and I'd been conditioned to let it happen. Meanwhile, my fiance and I became closer than ever. We talked about everything: our wedding, our future, and how to handle my family going forward. We made a pact to prioritize each other's well-being over family obligations, even if it meant keeping our distance long-term. For the first time in a while, it felt like we were on solid ground again. A few weeks after I stopped engaging with my family, my sister sent me a text. She apologized for how things had gone down, saying she didn't mean to hurt me and that she was just excited about her pregnancy. The timing of her apology felt off. It wasn't out of nowhere. It came shortly after I posted about the situation on Reddit. Part of me wanted to believe her, but it also felt like she was trying to save face after realizing how bad things had gotten. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to think about how, or if, I wanted to reply. A few days later, my mom called me. She knew about my sister's message and asked if I could just forgive her and move on. She said families have disagreements all the time, and that we shouldn't let this one get in the way. It felt like she was brushing aside the emotional toll the situation had taken on me and my fiance. I told my mom that I was willing to talk to my sister, but there needed to be boundaries moving forward. No more competing, no more overshadowing, and no more dismissing my feelings. My mom sighed but didn't argue. I could tell she wasn't fully on board, but it felt good to lay down my expectations. Not long after that call, I started getting texts from extended family members. Some were encouraging me to let things go, saying family is important and life's too short to hold grudges. Others were more passive-aggressive, hinting that I was being stubborn or overreacting. It was clear that my parents and sister had been talking to them, framing the situation in a way that painted me as the problem. Through all of this, I realized something important. Setting boundaries didn't mean I had to cut my family off completely. It just meant I needed to protect myself and my fiance from their toxic behaviors. If they couldn't respect those boundaries, then we'd have to maintain some distance, but it wasn't an all-or-nothing situation. I brought up the idea of family therapy again during another brief call with my mom. I told her it could be a chance for us to start fresh and address the deeper issues that had been building for years. She dismissed it, calling it unnecessary and saying we just needed to be patient with each other. It was frustrating, but it reaffirmed my decision to continue keeping my distance for now. Meanwhile, my sister leaned into playing the victim. She started telling people how distant I'd become and how much it hurt her that I wasn't around to support her during her pregnancy. The way she spun the narrative felt manipulative, like she was trying to rally sympathy while ignoring the role she played in creating this rift. It only made me more determined to focus on my own growth. In therapy, I started recognizing how much control I'd given my sister over the narrative in our family. For years, I'd let her actions dictate how I felt and reacted. Now, I was learning to take back that control. It wasn't easy, but every small step felt like progress. My fiance noticed the change, too. She told me she admired how I was handling everything and that she was proud of me for standing up for myself. Hearing that from her meant a lot. It reminded me why I was doing this, to create a healthier, happier life for us both. I decided to share another update on Reddit, outlining the steps I'd taken to set boundaries and prioritize my own well-being. The responses were incredibly supportive, with many people sharing their own stories of dealing with family dynamics and offering advice. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone, and that others had found ways to navigate similar situations. For now, I'm focusing on what matters most: my relationship, my mental health, and our wedding plans. I don't know if my family will ever fully understand where I'm coming from, but I'm okay with that. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is step back and let people figure things out on their own. Update 5. It's been a few months since I decided to distance myself from my family, and the silence has been surprisingly peaceful. My sister hasn't contacted me directly, and I haven't made any effort to reach out to her either. Occasionally, I'll get a short text from my parents asking how I'm doing, but I keep the responses polite and distant. There's no point reopening old wounds. The space has done wonders for my relationship with my fiance. Without the constant tension hanging over us, we've finally been able to enjoy our engagement. Wedding planning is in full swing, and it's been incredible to focus on the details without worrying about unnecessary family drama. For the first time in months, it feels like we're building something for ourselves on our own terms. I've continued therapy during this time, and it's been one of the most valuable things I've ever done. The therapist helped me understand how the dynamics in my family had shaped the way I handled conflict. I learned that my tendency to appease others, especially my sister, wasn't healthy. Setting boundaries has been a game changer, and I've become much more confident in trusting my instincts. A few weeks ago, my sister made another big announcement on social media. This time, it was a gender reveal for her baby. She went all out with a video, balloons, and confetti. It was a full production. When I saw it, I felt a small twinge of jealousy, but it disappeared almost as quickly as it came. I reminded myself that this wasn't my battle anymore. She can have her spotlight. I'm not interested in competing with her. My parents didn't reach out about the announcement, but I noticed a shift in the way they communicated. Their texts became more sporadic, and when they did message me, it was clear they were walking on eggshells. It was like they weren't sure how to approach me anymore. I didn't mind. It's better this way, short, polite, and without any pressure to engage. Last week, my sister made an unexpected move. She called me out of the blue, claiming she wanted to clear the air. I answered, partly out of curiosity and partly because I wanted to see if she was genuinely ready to take accountability. She apologized for everything, but the tone felt off. It came across more like a performance, as if she was checking off a box rather than truly addressing the hurt she caused. When she finished, I told her I appreciated the apology but that I wasn't interested in rehashing the past. I made it clear that while I wasn't holding a grudge, I wasn't ready to go back to the way things were. She paused for a moment and then ended the call quickly. It was the first time I'd felt fully in control of the narrative, and it was empowering to stand firm in my decision. A few days later, my parents invited me and my fiancée to a family gathering. It was framed as a casual get-together, but I could tell they were hoping to mend fences. I politely declined. There's no point forcing something that isn't meant to be, especially when it feels like nothing has really changed. My fiancé and I spent the evening at home, working on wedding plans instead. Speaking of the wedding, we're finally getting close to setting a date. The process has been exciting, and it feels amazing to do it without anyone else's expectations looming over us. We've decided to keep the guest list small and focus on celebrating with the people who truly support us. It's refreshing to plan an event that reflects our love and our future without the weight of family dynamics pulling us down. Over the past year, I've done a lot of reflecting. I've realized how much I've grown since this whole situation started. I've become more independent, more confident, and more focused on what truly matters. I've stopped chasing approval and validation from people who aren't willing to meet me halfway. That's been one of the hardest lessons to learn, but also the most freeing. Moving forward, I've decided not to engage with toxic family dynamics anymore. If my sister or parents want to be a part of my life, they'll have to meet me where I'm at, on my terms. I'm done compromising my happiness to keep the peace or protect someone else's ego. As we finalize our wedding plans, I feel a sense of closure. This chapter of family conflict is behind me, and I'm excited to focus on the life my fiancé and I are building together. The future feels bright, and for the first time in a long time, I'm truly at peace. I shared this final update on Reddit because so many people had been following the story and offering support. It's been overwhelming in the best way to see how many others have gone through similar struggles and come out stronger. I hope this update can give someone else the courage to set boundaries and prioritize their well-being. Thank you to everyone who followed along and offered advice. This journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. Now it's time to move forward, happier, healthier, and more focused on what really matters.